Sorry. Oh, hi, recording. All right. We're in Tim Keller's book on Proverbs. This morning, we're going to look at a few passages on words. There are many, many passages on words. So this is just a kind of part one, if you will, if I can get this here. And if I'd been thinking more clearly, I would have printed this on both sides, but I wasn't, so I didn't. So maybe you can hand out some there. There's 20 copies here. We may have to share a little bit. I think I over counted on this side, but we'll see how that goes. And I don't have a solution for online. But we'll try to talk our way through it so that you folks that are remote can get the full benefit. Here, this is.
Yeah, because he didn't put it on both sides. No problem.
Oh, thank you.
You don't want to underestimate.
Did that come out right? Did it look like it came out right, Cal?
I guess I didn't know it was two.
So you only got one?
I was just handing it out.
Okay, well, let's take a summary now. What all did everybody get? You should have 2 pages. One that says part 1, section 1, or Proverbs part 1 on the top. The other one is a continuation. Sections 1 and 2 on one sheet, and sections 3 and 4 on the other sheet. Did y'all get something that sort of looks like that?
Do we need more?
No. Well, I think we're okay, right? Are there enough copies for everybody to look over?
Oh, we'll share. I have section 1.
I only made 20. I thought that would be plenty. In fact, I have a solution. Here's one more. Yeah, no kidding.
I think this is going to beat to it. If the room is open.
Okay. All right. So I was given guidance that we're working through this book, and some of the chapters or some of the sections that had been done already. So the one that fell to my eye was this idea of words and the effect that words can have on us and our people around us. And these are, if you happen to have the book and you're following through on it, this is from section page 170, and I put the page numbers there for reference. So it's a section on words. There's quite a few pages on words there. So this is just a few of them, the first 4 that came up. So what I guess we'd like to do, we're primarily oriented towards discussion, right? That's what we're trying to do. So I'm not going to try to lecture. We're just going to look at each one of these and discuss the discussion questions and take it from there. And then we'll move to the other one. There's 4 of these here. If we get through all of them, great. If we don't, no problem. All right. So the first one is words kill. We know many places in the Bible where it talks about the impact, the serious negative impact of our words. So this is the first one. Dick, could you start us off by reading those 2 Proverbs there?
Proverbs 12:18. There is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits.
All right. So the first discussion questions that emerged in my mind, and I think one or two of these are in the text, are what are some examples of rash words as sword thrusts, both in our lives and in the Bible?
Where we often think of rash words as being cruel, but they cannot be intended that way at all. Like Peter saying to Jesus, "Oh, everybody else will leave, but I'll never leave. I'll never deny you." And those can be rash words.
Yeah.
Biblical example is found in Job. Dr. Dennis Johnson used to say, when Job's friends appeared, as long as they kept their mouth shut, everything was fine. That's,
Well, maybe not fine.
they cut to the heart.
Yes.
They,
I think
Taylor.
too of not even like intentional insults, but just speaking without thinking that can hurt another person, or even jokes that, or quips that.
It's almost the definition of rash, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a good example too, because sometimes if you say just one sentence, you listen to it, it could mean three things, right? It could be sarcasm, it could be genuine, or it could be more like a parable, if you will,
yeah.
right? It could kind of be representative of something, but because you just said it quickly or whatever, you didn't give a chance for the person to know how to receive it. So then, yeah, you're kind of more in danger.
And today we even have social media to document all of our stupid comments.
Yeah. On the flip side, what are some examples of words of the wise that bring healing?
Copies, anyone? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
All the extras.
And we have latecomers probably too.
Okay, not to kill trees, anyone? Okay.
We need
Section
page
over
2.
here.
Only
Okay, only
page 2.
Okay, well, just take it. Okay, I'll put it here. Anybody else?
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, well,
Okay, words of the wise that bring healing. Again, a context and contrast to rash words that cause harm, that are like sword thrusts. Tan.
Sorry, I was thinking about your previous question. I watched a movie this week where there was a death, and a Christian character in the movie was, I guess, trying to comfort the person. And I think we can fall into this too, where it's bad news, but then you come along and you're trying to ease it, and you just like automatically might say, well, God has a better plan and stuff. And so you're trying, but you're not really like, I think that is considered rash, whereas the opposite might be, so that might be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually,
The opposite might be something of just like, the wise word is empathizing with them and giving them space to
yeah,
breathe.
absolutely. We've got a lot of counsel in social guidance today on how to empathize with someone, and whether someone is actually, it's not really new, but whether someone is actually seeking advice in a situation of hard times, or whether they just want you to hear them. And some of us are compelled to give advice and to help them solve the problem. Maybe it's an engineering thing, maybe it's a guy thing, maybe it's an engineering guy thing, I don't know. But in any event, sometimes that advice that we feel compelled to give, maybe it's off the top of our head and we haven't really thought it through, which kind of is the definition of that rash part. And that comes across badly. And it can be very badly as a sword thrust in some cases, which I think is kind of what you're touching on, right, Tam? So it's worth digging into that if we, even with good intentions, or at least benign intentions, we can still do real harm with our words. So we want to think carefully. I mean, Dick's example of Peter, right? He was not at all intending that to be a bad thing, right? He wasn't being malicious, but he was preparing for the wrong attack, so to speak, right? He wasn't preparing for the back door, side door attack of the little servant girl around the fire saying, hey, weren't you with those guys? He was preparing for the frontal assault. And a lot of times as believers, I think that's where we're prepared, right? We're ready to whip out our sword and lop someone's ear off, and not so ready for the little side attack. John.
Yeah, I'm thinking the saying a soft answer turneth away wrath. And I've seen that happen a lot. I would be shouting at someone and sort of angry, and they would sweetly answer me back, and it makes a big difference.
Pause. Take a moment.
Genesis 50, after the horrific things that Joseph suffered in many contexts, and we notice the thing, what you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be saved as they are today. But then he says, but don't be afraid. I'm going to provide for you and for your little ones. And then it says, thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them.
God is faithful, even in our neglect, even in our brashness and rashness. Other ways words do harm besides triggering violence. You can start a war with words, but that's not the only way they do harm.
Cuts people down.
Cut people down, yes. Hurt feelings that maybe don't go much farther, but they leave a wound. Others?
The little word just, you say, oh, that's your opinion. That opens dialogue, but when you say that's just your opinion, that's a put down. That closes the door.
Yeah. So nuance in how we say things, the tone in which our message comes out, whether it's actually the tone of voice or whether it is little words, pronouns and connectors and conjunctions that help to frame that tone have a big impact, right? I mean, language is complex, and by God's grace, we have this powerful tool of language. But if we don't use it carefully, it can be deadly and really harmful, right? Other ways words harm?
Hurt our feelings.
Yeah.
We have to give our feelings to the Lord. Otherwise, we use harsh language back.
So maybe it's on the receiving side as well, isn't it? I mean, that isn't quite where this passage is going, but I think there's also a message there that how we receive those words and whether we can kind of give a sort of benefit of the doubt to the speaker to have meant them in a more benign way, maybe testing subsequent phrases or statements to see if their intention is as malicious as we might have first taken it. So both giving and receiving, right? How we do that. And sometimes that we can find out that the intent was not malicious and we just misunderstood the intent, Mike.
And when it comes to written words, that becomes even more important because you don't hear the tone or the inflection of how it's said. And you could use the same words when you speak can come out in a myriad of ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you can read them on a page and put your own perspective on it and think, oh, they're shouting at me.
Yes. Or
when in fact they're not.
Yes. Think of some examples of that. Again, biblical examples, any others where we have both the idea of sword thrusts, which is pretty harmful, right? Pretty deliberately harmful, I think, in those cases, not so much unintentional. And then healing, words of healing. Certainly the Genesis 50 example that Steve raised is an excellent one. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
Going back on the healing part, going back to what you were saying previously about being empathetic, I struggle sometimes be empathetic. It's just not my first thought. My first thought is, well, tell the person it's not so bad, right? And Romans 12, I believe, tells us to mourn with those who mourn. And so we think of mourning as being, maybe a negative thing, but it's not necessarily.
Even Ecclesiastes,
and sometimes it is proper to mourn somebody who's mourning.
Yeah. There is real tragedy in this life. It is not to be neglected. It is real. We feel it. God gave us that emotional ability to feel tragedy, to feel loss and devastation. And we need to recognize that when someone else is going through that we are to be sensitive to it as well. And there is a real bond of fellowship that comes when we can empathize, as Dick just pointed out, with someone else who is really struggling with loss or tragic devastation of some sort or other. So these are healing elements. Any other thoughts on this idea? Again, this frame is of words that kill, how words can do great harm. We talked a little bit about healing as well. The second section is words can make you alive and heal. So there's a little bit of counterpoint to this. Let's see, maybe Tim, can you read Proverbs 12:14 there? I think it's printed.
Sure.
And then we'll look at 15:4 as well.
From the fruit of his mouth, a man is satisfied with good, and the work of a man's hand comes back to him.
Read the other one too.
A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit.
Okay, I think sometimes we don't recognize how powerful our words can be. And so there is a value in thinking that through, that sometimes the things we say, we may think them as an offhand, insignificant remark, but they can be taken much more seriously in some cases. Anybody think of some examples of that sort of thing?
It seems like there are multiple times when Jesus was presented with people, often a woman who was dejected and felt guilty and unworthy. Also, you can think, that publican and the Pharisee thing. And Jesus, responds with great mercy and great encouragement to the people who are already broken.
Yeah. Jesus gives us that model of how to be sensitive, how to see where the person really is, and how to kind of cut through the noise, right? And he never scolds anybody that comes to him for help, right? If we look through the Gospels, we can't find anywhere where the only people that he's scolding are the people that are taking advantage of other people, one way or another. So be sensitive. Look to be gentle with each other. See what you can say to bless people.
Skip, I'm not sure that I fully understand the second verse there, 54. A gentle tongue is a tree of life, but what did it mean by perverseness?
Yeah.
Sarcasm?
So when we jump over to what Mr. Keller here is actually saying, he says, words can wound but also heal. The tongue can be soothing and a tree of life. Words are like fruit or food for us. We need them to live. Most of us can remember years later the words from a passage in a book or said by a friend or teacher that turned on a light or that implanted new ideas that we never forgot. He clarifies also that we also need words coming from the outside to affirm and validate us. Imagine an artist who does a painting. I don't know, this is a perfect example, but does she say, I don't care that everyone else says it's trash, I like it? If she is going to truly take pride in her work, someone else will need to offer words of praise for the art. There's a kind of validation there that at least we appreciate. Whether we actually need it or not, I think could be argued. Supremely, the Word of God has a living power to relate us to God and to change our minds and hearts. We don't live by bread alone, but by good words, especially those in line with God's. Are you aware of the great power even your offhand words have to bless others? When was a time that you have seen this power in your life or someone else's? So perverseness, the soothing tongue is a tree of life. He's using a different translation, but that's fine. But a perverse tongue crushes the spirit.
Skip, just out of
Yeah,
curiosity, I just Googled the word perverse because I'm trying to figure out what's the word perverse
Yeah.
even mean. And it says here, showing a deliberate and obstinate desire to behave in a way that's unreasonable or unacceptable, often in spite of the consequences.
Yeah, I think that's a very good example, a very good definition. Yeah.
I can wrap my head around it.
So the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. So someone again, a perverse tongue is something that is kind of flying in the face of the circumstances, to bend the phrase a little bit, just a sec, Scott. And maybe that is, we have this compulsion to turn the sword or to turn the knife in someone a lot of times, to really make sure that landed, that remark that was a rebuke or something like that. And I think some of this can get out of control, that it's beyond helpful. And so that's I think this perverse idea. Scott, you had an idea or a question?
Well, yeah, I just think if you look at the way the devil communicates in scripture, his speech is perverse. It has a destructive end.
Did God really say?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And the way he misleads, the way he deceives, the way he encourages in certain directions.
That's right.
Everything is perverse.
That's right. Manipulative to the negative, right?
It's also, these words kind of give a command. Like when we think about Jesus talking about, hey, murder isn't just what you do physically to someone. It's what you say to them. It's those things. But then, so we tell ourselves, okay, if I just don't say anything, right? Like maybe we said something that was really bad. So my reaction is often, I'm just not going to say anything. And God doesn't give the Christian that option, right? Now, it's better to not speak if what I'm going to say is harmful.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're allowed to go, well, fine, then I'm not going to have any influence. I'm just not going to say anything. It's like, no, you're to be a peacemaker. Or you're to be, right, someone who
may need to
brings
fess up,
something
right?
good. So it's kind of the command as well as the prohibition that we see from God. And so it's kind of like saying, hey, don't just close your mouth. Make your mouth be the fruit of the Spirit.
Absolutely.
Or whatever. So it's a challenge, I think, because sometimes we're just thinking about what to avoid. He's like, what could you do?
Another word that I think we should consider is insensitive words. Not reading the situation right, not reading where the person's at, and again, being too quick, too impulsive to speak, that word has not been mentioned, impulsive, but the word rash was mentioned, they're correlated. But and what is your motive in your speaking? And that's always so important. If we are going to speak, and yes, sometimes it's better to stay silent if we don't have a good word to say, but we should, what is my goal? Am I going to build this person up? Am I going to de-escalate this situation? How can I best do that? What will most honor and please the Lord and point people to Christ? What's my motive?
Yeah.
And the person who's perverse is focused on themselves and not focused on God.
Yeah, a lot of times deflecting blame for something that happened instead of
never happens.
That idea of either there's lots of modern terms for this. The idea of pivoting or projecting or yes, that might have happened, and yes, I might have been responsible for it, but you also have responsibility. This idea of shifting responsibility or just dissipating responsibility. And that comes to Eric's point of speaking up, right? I mean, we have a responsibility to speak up, and sometimes it's confessing. Sometimes it's confessing that we had a role in something while somebody else is about to take the fall for it. So again, language is so complex, so deep, and that is both a challenge for us, but also a blessing that the Lord gives us, this incredibly nuanced communication tool that we have at our disposal to use, and we need to use it with great care and discretion. How can we learn and practice to use words to bless and encourage others instead of tearing down and damaging? Well, that's kind of the meat of the whole thing, isn't it?
I think a lot of times in my life is if someone hurts my feelings, then I tell God that I forgive them. Just God and I. And then the person who's hurt my feelings is so much less in my mind. And I can look at them so much more objectively than if I just kind of huff and puff and feel sorry. So for me, the key is God, they hurt my feelings or whatever they did. I still forgive them in your name. And I think a lot of us have trouble. I don't hear people saying, I forgive you, as much as I did when I was younger. And so I think part of the healing part could be just giving. A woman hit me in the grocery store and walked off, and then later she came up to me and apologized. And so I said, I forgive you. I just do, because I've done that with God.
Yeah.
So it's just that forgiveness, that genuine acceptance.
Yeah.
Yes, it hurt me, but yes, God has it.
Yes.
Sort of.
Yes.
I think that could be healing.
We can take offense at all sorts of funny places, right? And that can lead to words that are harmful, even when the original triggering event might not have been significant or even intended that way. And something, James's expression of how mighty is a fire that comes out of, forest fire that comes out of a little tiny spark. And, we just have to be so on guard against our emotions, which, we're sensitive to stuff. We're kind of spring loaded to sense offense at something somebody says. And so to back away from that, to use prayer, to recognize to the Lord that we feel offended by something, and, to help us deal with that in the moment, right? So that we're not necessarily jumping back, spring loaded back to return fire, but that we are able to absorb it for a moment, ponder it, reflect on it, and think wisely about what the right thing is, what the right response might be. A great idea. Are we ready to move on to, go ahead.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
for me, it's just been so helpful to be surrounded by so many people who just take their time to speak wisely and, not perfect, but just very good examples to me and help hold me accountable too. I was really noticing it last weekend at the church camp out, just how kindly people, respectfully people spoke to one another, and yeah.
It was really pleasant, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Even if it was a little warm. Other thoughts on?
Well, you do need to be filled with good things.
Yes.
Right? I think about, if there's a well in our hearts, overwhelming to eternal life, what kind of words will come out of my heart, right? But if I'm surrounded with things that are kind of feeding me that are negative, that's going to come out of my heart more, because that's what I've been dwelling on. That's been
Absolutely.
That's what's influenced me.
So the Bible tells us to dwell on things that are good, right? Philippians 4, is it? 4:8. Yeah. If any of these things, think on these things and ponder them. And that way you're putting your headspace in that context, right? Of looking at things in a positive way, in a good way, recognizing that the Lord is in control of these things, right? We feel, looking out the window at any moment, that things are racing wildly out of control. And maybe it's up to us to solve them, or maybe it's up to us to just hide. But God is in control. Romans 8:28 is still in effect. It has not been waived. Other thoughts on section 2, John?
Well, one thing we could do is keep a gentle tongue is the tree of life. Keep that in mind for this week. Just because a verse that you're going to call up every day and as a reminder.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also just kind of add on to what everybody else has said. I think sometimes we do have those hard conversations that we have to have, our responses, and pausing and praying for the Holy Spirit to give us the right words is really helpful, and asking others to pray for you in those situations.
Absolutely.
Really just.
Yeah, that's so true, because even when we are trying to be careful, we tend to rely on our own judgment and our own wisdom in those situations, and to pause and to ask the Lord to put those words that he would have in our mouth. Kathy?
Piggybacking on what Lisa just said, when I do that, we rare times, it reminds me of the true battle and who the enemy really is. That it's a spiritual battle. It's always a spiritual battle. And this other person who said something, whether to hurt me on purpose or not, they're not the enemy.
That's right.
We have one enemy. And so then our one weapon is prayer.
Yeah.
And going to the Lord. Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like they're our enemy, but
no, they look like the enemy.
We've got our sword out. We're ready.
Exactly.
Section 3, on the first one on the second page. Dishonesty, right? Joe, can you read the verse there?
Yeah, 16:28. A dishonest or perverse man spreads strife, and a whisperer or gossip separates close friends.
So Keller talks about two ideas here, right? The dishonest or lying or perverse. We talked about perversity, spreading strife, disharmony between people, and then a whisperer or a gossip, also separating close friends. So two subtle but related ideas here, that a gossip or someone and then he digs into what gossiping is, right? Because gossiping is not simply recounting something that happened to someone else. It is a recounting with a kind of increased, I keep coming back to this word malice, but the idea of tearing down someone's honor and someone's integrity, someone's personhood, and to say things about someone to a third party that is exaggerated in a negative way, perhaps, brings out certain characteristics. And again, we can be very subtle, right? We can be very clever in our subtlety about these things, but the message can be completely clear. So actual outright lying and gossiping are the two ideas here that he brings out. And then how are they different? Well, we'll get past that, but other ideas on how they're different or what brings them together. Examples of harm that you've seen them do. Maybe some biblical examples. Something comes to mind.
I forgot the names involved, but there was a story where King David was, he was in a situation where there was a guy who schemed against him by giving him bad advice.
Oh, yeah.
And when that advice was taken, the guy who was giving good advice went and hanged himself. I mean, we have to be careful about what the motive is of the advice. It sounded good, you know, it turned David's heart.
Yeah. Sometimes their consequences are far-reaching, things that we say. And I think the character here of this idea is that it talks about a dishonest man. It talks about a whisperer. So these are not simply that you gossiped once, or not simply that you fibbed once, but that characterizes how you are. So it's really important to get out of the business of being dishonest, to work hard and concentrate on when you're repeating something to a third party that it's clear and accurate and doesn't do harm to that person's character or personhood, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the easiest, sorry, my name is Foster for those who may not know. So one of the easiest characters in the Bible for us to fall back on in terms of dishonest behavior is perhaps Judas. Obviously, his behavior alone tore apart the discipleship, the whole crew, and led to the ultimate crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So it's easy to always look back on that character to understand how certain behaviors can cause significant changes in people's destiny, people's trajectory, and how that can lead to death sometimes.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really important idea is, the Gospels recount a little bit of Judas's history that one could see in retrospect his character and how that was consistent with what the action was that he took of betraying Jesus. But that character is, we need to examine ourselves for how do we behave consistently. And I think this is one where we can really give a lot of introspective scrutiny to our words and our character. And it's surprisingly easy to adjust. We again, with prayer, with consideration, the Lord blesses us with the ability to make that change, to turn the knob a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more, so that we eventually become more and more uplifting and less one of these characteristics. Which, Mike, go ahead.
It's a matter of the heart. All of these things, whether good or bad, flow out of our heart. And that's what we have to guard day in and day out, and asking God to help us to have the right heart attitude so that our words will not be words of lying or perverseness or whispering, but rather be that which promotes life. Those that are calm, those that are edifying, those that are uplifting, those that are truly compassionate and empathetic, rather than sword thrusts.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important that our minds and hearts are saturated with His Word.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's useful to point out, though, that this does not mean that we are to go around condoning bad things that we see people do, right? This is not to condone, not to just layer over something that is damaging or harmful, but we are called to be salt and light, to be iron sharpening iron, as Mike likes to remind us frequently, that we are called to this speaking truth in love, right? And so there is nuance here. This is not easy, but both of these have to come together in the right place and time.
Whenever we hear about the sword, for me, it's so hard to equate the fruits of the Spirit, the sword of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, and faithfulness. when we think we're fighting, when I want to fight back, I don't think of those a lot of times. I think of some other things and other ways to use my tongue to hurt people or to fight. I think of fighting as the perverse side versus we as a Christian, the sort of the spirit is the fruit of the spirit, which is totally, totally different.
Absolutely. We forget who the enemy is, right? As Kathy was alluding earlier, I mean, we tend to see other people as our enemy, and the sword comes out, and we're ready to lop ears off. And yet Satan is our enemy, the deceiver, right? When we recognize that and pause, we see something different in the person we're about to lop the ear off of.
The other facet is that it's God's side versus the enemy's side all the time. And we need to go with the sort of the spirit.
Absolutely.
I want to comment. I was wrong. It wasn't David that got bad advice. It was Absalom, and that advice was given to Absalom. The bad advice was given to Absalom to protect David.
Yeah.
So, sorry about that, guys.
Joe, did you have something?
Please.
About 3 comments ago. No, I just think maybe to dwell on this dishonesty spread strife, it just feels like it's something that it's really important for us to realize, because maybe I'll state it in a question. Have you ever observed something happen and you had a perspective on it, and then someone says something that's kind of skewed, but it kind of corrupts how you see that thing that happened? Like if you're, take an example from the news almost, where you watch something unfold, but then you see what people are saying the next day, and it feels like they're kind of like they're taking a spin on things to make you feel a certain way or think something different about it. So I think that's something that, especially as Christians, we should really be on guard against, especially what we say about things and how we characterize things. But even in our culture that, everything's more of like an opinion piece rather than stating, facts that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And then same thing with, whispering and how it separates close friends, just how we feel like maybe it's normalized that you say something about somebody, but you don't say it to them. I've been convicted of this recently where I find myself saying something about somebody, but then I ask, like, would I say that to their face as well or not? And I feel like that's where the whispering, I'm willing to say things without them knowing about it, but not when they do know about it. I feel like that's a good check on me as well.
And that bitter feeling that we get when we realize that we've just done something like that, again, we come back to Peter, but go to the Lord and confess. Ask for forgiveness from the Lord. If there is an appropriateness, maybe it is appropriate to go to that person, but certainly we need to go to the Lord and confess and ask his forgiveness for that. And he will give us that peace that passes all understanding, right? That recharges us and prepares us for battle again with Satan, right? And gives us that spirit that we are alert and ready and not fixated on a failure that we just had. But we need to go through those steps, right? We can't just swipe it off and assume it didn't happen, because it did. So thanks. That was really good. I think given that we're at time, we'll skip section 4 and we'll close in prayer unless there are any other comments, observations, questions, thoughts. Anybody else? All right. Dear Father in heaven, this is such a rich bit of material you've given us in your word, as all of your word is, Lord. And we ask that you would illuminate it to us, that you would explain it and make it applicable when we are in the moment of using words one way or another, Lord, that you would give us good guidance, that our wisdom, that your wisdom would infuse our words, and that we would be effective and appropriate and kind and gentle and filling and uplifting and not tearing down. We thank you for blessing us with your word. We thank you for blessing us with the fellowship we have here this morning. We thank you for the opportunity to come together and worship you. We ask that all these things in the precious name of our risen Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. I didn't seek input from the group. But
No, we don't do
how would we do that?